Madrid, a city of pride and passion. And at its heart, a museum with secrets dark and strange. A lethal lost art. A clock possessed by the devil. And a subterranean quest for the riches of Spain. Secrets hidden in plain sight, inside Madrid's Palacio Real. In Madrid, there is no building more imposing or magnificent than this. It's the Royal Palace, or in Spanish, Palacio Real. For centuries, it has been at the center of Spain's political and social life. From the Bourbon monarchs, through the dark years of dictator Francisco Franco, to its present incarnation as a working palace and extraordinary museum. In what were once royal ballrooms and bedrooms, royal possessions are now on public display. A king wore this armor. A queen told the time by this clock. And a royal retainer commissioned this fresco to remind visitors of how Spain achieved its power. It shows Christopher Columbus giving the planet to King Ferdinand and Queen Isabella. Thanks to Columbus, conquistadors had a new world to conquer and treasure to send back to Spain by the galleon load, to gild the ceilings of the palace. Historian Marcos Martinon Torres specializes in the era of the Spanish Empire.
One of the aspects I've been researching is the material reason behind the splendor and the power of Spain.
Marcos believes that the foundation of Spanish wealth was not silver or gold, but a third element, hidden in plain sight in this room. What it is and how it shaped Spain's destiny is a museum secret. The investigation begins in the Spanish town of Almaden, at the bottom of a mine shaft. Far beneath the ground, Marcos navigates tunnels dug hundreds of years ago. The miners weren't looking for silver or gold.
So this is what the miners were after. This is cinnabar. This red rock that we see here running in a vein. Only here would you get such high amounts of this precious red stone. It was crushed to create bright red pigments. Some of those frescoes we've seen at the Palacio Real are actually made with this pigment. And that's one of the reasons that made cinnabar so special, so appealing to different cultures throughout time.
But it wasn't cinnabar's color that shaped Spain's destiny. 16th century Spaniards learned that it can be transformed.
Somehow they figured out that by heating the cinnabar, they could evaporate the sulfur. They would be left behind with tiny droplets of what we now know was mercury, this fascinating liquid metal.
Today we know that mercury gives off toxic vapor, which is why the Almaden mine was closed in 2000.
We now can explain it in scientific terms, but also in the 16th century, people would see that people would go mad and die after working with mercury.
16th century alchemists believed the risk was worth it. Some thought mercury was the fabled philosopher's stone that could turn lead into gold, while others discovered the element's real magic. Mercury can liberate precious metals from low-grade ore, and that would become the lucrative solution to a problem.
During the first few centuries of Spanish expansion into America, it seemed relatively easy to just go there and exploit the richest gold and silver ores. But very soon after the Spanish started exploiting that, they found that the richest veins, the richest ores, had been exhausted. So they had poorer veins that required more labor to extract a smaller amount of silver.
In what is now Bolivia, and what was then a Spanish colony, there is a mountain of low-grade silver ore. Here, Spanish engineers scaled up the alchemical process. While natives were forced to work in the mines, bringing silver ore to the surface, mules plodded in circles on a stone patio to mix seawater, silver ore, and mercury.
It was through this trampling that the mercury would eventually amalgamate with the silver so that it would finally leave the silver behind for you to collect.
Each kilogram of silver required 2 kilograms of mercury from the Almaden mine in Spain.
1/3 of all the mercury ever produced across the world came from this mine. There was a massive logistical enterprise to send these massive amounts of mercury to America.
Upping mercury production came at a tragic human cost.
Tremors, severe pains, loads of people are reported as going insane. And of course, many of them as well would die prematurely.
In the Americas, the problem was even more devastating.
The patio process was particularly toxic because you generated a lot of vapor and a lot of mercury compounds.
Historians estimate that over several centuries, 8 million miners died to produce precious metals, which would have a value today of $30 trillion.
Without the mercury, we wouldn't have had the gold and silver that made us rich back then. It's very difficult to overestimate the importance of mercury to the history of Spain.
The element that shaped Spain's destiny is hidden in plain sight in the Palacio Real's Hall of Mirrors.
If you wanted to make a mirror until almost the 20th century, you needed transparent glass and then a reflective backing, which was made of mercury combined with tin in an amalgam. So when I look at this mirror and see my face, I'm seeing myself, of course, but I'm also seeing mercury.
The mirror maker sealed the glass to protect the royals from toxic mercury vapor. 8 million Spanish subjects weren't so lucky. Next on Museum Secrets, the lost art of the swordmaster. The Palacio Real, the royal palace of Spain, stands in a city with a glorious past. It attracts more than 1 million visitors every year. Today, 2 people from New York City plan to do more than take in the sights of Madrid. Ramon Martinez and his wife, Jeanette Acosta Martinez, are the world's foremost experts in a unique style of fencing that was practiced in Spain 3 centuries ago. They're trying to revive this lost art and solve a mystery. On this plaza, on a summer day in 1646, 17 swordsmen lined up to accept the challenge of a man named Don Miguel Perez de Mendoza. And it would seem that Mendoza was a fool, because in fencing, to defeat even one opponent requires the utmost stamina. To face 3 challengers would be exhausting. And as for defeating 17, that would seem to be impossible. Why did Mendoza challenge so many? And how did he hope to survive? Ramon may be in a unique position to uncover these secrets because he and Mendoza have a few things in common. Starting with Mendoza's neighborhood.
This was a very dangerous area in the 17th century, and anything can happen. You had all kinds of violent people, cutthroats in any corner. You had other swordsmen. You never know there was a rivalry or not. This is put up or shut up right here in this neighborhood.
To Ramon, these mean streets are familiar.
I was born and raised in the Bronx, New York. More exactly, I come from the South Bronx, which is probably one of the most dangerous areas in New York City. We're talking about 16th century or 17th century Madrid as compared to the South Bronx of the 60s and 70s. I would say it was pretty much the same. I started carrying a blade when I was like 7 years old. Not so much for being violent, which is the last thing on earth, that you really look for, but you use it as a tool, as a method of self-defense. I mean, everybody had a blade.
In old Madrid, the blade of choice was the rapier, like the ones on display in the Palacio Real.
What you see here is a collection of rapiers that were typical of the mid-17th century. These weapons are the weapons of personal defense. This would have been the Glock of its time, light, lethal, extremely maneuverable.
Don Miguel Perez de Mendoza owned such a weapon, but so did each of his 17 challengers. So why did Mendoza think he had an edge? Ramon believes the answer is in Spain's National Library. For over 30 years, Ramon has studied rare documents that have allowed him to recreate Mendoza's uniquely Spanish style of swordplay. It was known simply as the skill, or in Spanish, destreza.
All fencing schools are effective and deadly, but what made this unique was that it was not based upon preconceived techniques. It was founded upon a profound understanding of spatial relationships and movement. Destreza made a swordsman very cold-blooded, detached. His adversary is nothing more than a geometric problem that he has to solve.
As a well-known destreza master, Mendoza couldn't walk through Madrid without constant challenges from wannabes. So he decided to prove once and for all that he was the best.
He asked King Philip IV permission to post cartels throughout the kingdom as an open challenge to any swordsman who would face him. So he was answered by 17 swordsmen, and he faced them all in front of the king.
As for how Mendoza fought that day, Ramon and Jeanette hope to demonstrate with a destreza masterclass.
We'll begin with a salute. Destreza has absolutely nothing to do with what most people are familiar with, which is modern sport fencing. One of the most blatant differences is that modern sport fencing, all the combat is linear. They conduct all of that on a strip. Destreza combat takes place on an imaginary circle that moves along the ground with the combatants. So I'm following her. I'm being very careful not to come too close or too far away. But I don't have to stay there. I can switch direction, and now she has to follow me, and she can do the same thing to me. The reality is you want to deceive your adversary. You want to confuse him. Don't be like a cat stalking a mouse, because I see some of you doing this. You're stalking. No, you have to be serene. Avoid any tension. Avoid any excessive actions of the legs, because you will get tired very quickly. When you start to move, you're not
An opponent's body language is key.
You have to gaze and see not only the blade, you have to see the positioning of the person's shoulders, the person's feet, how he's holding his arm. You are observing constantly what the other person's doing. It has to do with cold-blooded determination and being able to solve that problem, which that person is a problem for you because he's trying to kill you, okay? That's a problem that you don't want.
Ramon believes that Mendoza used the same techniques when he faced 17 challengers, one by one.
But he would have waited for the adversary to initiate so that they would basically give themselves away their intention. You see him in front of you, when you go to reach to touch him, he's gone, like a ghost.
So while traditional swashbuckling swordsmen move fast and furiously, destreza involves calculation, but far less exertion. A traditional swordsman may strike many times, while a destreza master may only have to strike once. In the plaza where Mendoza fought, Ramon and Jeanette can spar for hours without breaking a sweat. And so it seems did Mendoza himself, as he dispatched one challenger after the other. And when Mendoza discovered he was the last man standing, Ramon believes he knows what he was thinking.
It was great. I wish I could keep going. Bring on 17 more.
Beside each of Mendoza's fallen challengers was a lethal weapon, much like the ones in the Palacio Real. Even the finest rapier is no protection against a master of destreza. Next on Museum Secrets, a clock possessed by the devil. This morning at the Palacio Real, this curator can look forward to a long day. Because his job is to wind the clocks. Here, there are 700 timepieces dating from the 18th century. The collection was started by King Ferdinand VI, who is remembered for being indecisive, except in his love for his wife Maria and for clocks.
Y el reloj en aquel momento era una de las manifestaciones artísticas más ricas que había. Entonces, realmente a ellos lo que les interesa es tener relojes de los mejores relojeros.
Collecting clocks became a royal obsession, and curator Amelia Aranda has the paper trail to prove it.
Estos documentos son los encargos, las nóminas, las cuentas de los relojeros de cámara.
Making a clock for a king was highly lucrative. But for one young clockmaker, it nearly became a life-threatening experience. The reason why is a museum secret. Our story begins in 1758 in Geneva, Switzerland, where a young genius named Pierre-Jacques Droz decided to create the world's most advanced timepiece. And it would do much more than tell time. While restoring the clock, curator Manuel Santalaya Sanchez discovered the intricate mechanisms that Droz crafted to remember musical melodies.
Esta máquina es la que hace la sonería. Tiene 8 melodías distintas y se van cambiando automáticamente. Esta otra maquinaria y lo que hace es imitar el canto o el trino del pajarito. Aquí se ven los fuelles y estos tubos le mandan aire y el pastor con sus dedos toca una melodía. Este autómata lo hace un poco especial, puesto que este realmente no simula que toca la flauta, sino que realmente toca la flauta.
To refine the clock's logic, he pioneered the mathematical formulas we now call algorithms. When the clock was finished, Droz loaded it on a cart and traveled overland to Spain.
Hasta llegar a Madrid con la intención de presentar el reloj al rey de España, al rey Fernando VI.
Droz hoped to win a royal commission from the influential monarch that would make his name and his career. But when he entered the palace, King Ferdinand was not at home. His much-loved wife had died suddenly, and the king had retired to this gloomy medieval castle to mourn. As Droz prepared to unveil his creation, he must have worried that the king would be in no mood for clocks. He waited nervously for the king's reaction.
El rey, que estaba muy lloroso, estaba triste por la pérdida de su esposa. El pastor, que tocaba la flauta. El perro ladraba. Los niños columpiándose. Pues realmente aquello le sacó de esa melancolía, ¿no?
But while the king was delighted, his Catholic advisors were not. To them, the lifelike automata could only be the work of the devil. They ordered Droz to provide an explanation or face the Inquisition. Droz was forced to open the mechanism to prove it wasn't driven by the devil's magic, just wires and bellows and gears. The churchman agreed that Droz would escape the Inquisitor's scrutiny this time. And the king agreed to purchase the clock for a king's ransom.
Es uno de los primeros relojes con autómata con esa categoría artística y técnica. Tal vez la pieza emblema de la colección.
When Droz got back home to Switzerland, he turned his attention from animated clocks to the automata themselves, creating mechanical androids, and in an achievement long ahead of its time, a programmable mechanical hand that could write a complete sentence. It's probably a good thing that this wonder was never seen by Spain's inquisitors, because if it had been, Pierre-Jacques Droz may have died before his time. Up next, the secret of the flamenco master. In the Palacio Real, one gallery is devoted to music. For centuries, Spain has been best known for the sound of the guitar, especially when the guitar is in the hands of a master of flamenco. On most evenings, after the Palacio closes, scores of tourists stroll just next door to one of Madrid's best-known flamenco clubs. The rhythms are mesmerizing, and the performers are intense. But there are rarely any local people in the audience. Is this flamenco authentic? Or is there a real flamenco that tourists don't see? These secrets are of personal interest to a woman named Yinka Graves. She was born in England, but she's come to Madrid to discover the real flamenco.
I started taking flamenco lessons just as a hobby, sort of once a week. And I suppose flamenco, maybe because of its complexity, once you start getting into it, it sort of takes over you.
Every day, Yinka enters this inconspicuous building and climbs the stairs to the famous flamenco school called Amor de Dios. The facility may look tired, but the teachers aren't.
Most of them are top flamenco dancers. You know, this is the creme de la creme. If you want to learn flamenco, this is the best place to come to.
Here, there is little evidence of the tourist image of flamenco, except for some posters from the 1960s. Then, Spain was a poor nation, ruled by dictator Francisco Franco. He ordered Spanish gypsies, known as gitanos, to make their traditions, including flamenco, more tourist-friendly.
That image of the flamenco dancer, the castanets, the polka dot dresses, as something that would sell Spain to the foreign world was something that was created during Franco's time.
At Yinka's school, there are no castanets and frilly dresses, only clapping hands, and an improvised song called a solea.
This is almost like the mother of flamenco. This is the base. This is these songs, as you speak of sort of suffering and lament and so on.
The pain expressed in the solea is rooted in history. Since their caravans reached Spain in the 15th century, Gitanos have been an oppressed minority, ghettoized and persecuted. They were forbidden to perform in public until King Charles III passed his leniency edict in 1783. From then on, the Gitanos were free to perform, but allowed few other ways to make a living. Many still live in poverty. When the Gitano experience is expressed in song, Yinka's role is to translate the feeling into movement. For a person who's not a Gitano, this can be a challenge.
It's difficult if you haven't really been there with them. You know, they've got that sort of long history together to really, you know, sort of do it justice.
But when Yinka speaks with the school's elder Gitano statesman, Enrique Pantojas, he tells her that the key to flamenco is not race, but something called duende.
Pero el duende es espontaneidad, genialidad. El duende sabe, no sé lo que voy a hacer. Por ejemplo, el duende, estoy bailando y estoy improvisando. Eso puede ser duende. ¿Sabes lo que te digo?
Como la inspiración, ¿no?
Como la inspiración, parecía la inspiración. Primo hermano de la inspiración. Ese puede ser duende.
Teachers encourage their students to discover duende on their own.
It's about you really finding where you feel comfortable. Because ultimately flamenco is something that you teach yourself to a certain extent.
To further Yinka's progress, her teachers have arranged an informal session with a family of flamenco luminaries.
No se conformó con nada, con los dineros que gana para curar tu enfermedad y enfermedad de amores y de cariño y de amargura que llevo yo mi mente en blanco.
That was amazing for one and a real honor. It was like, oh my gosh, I can't believe that I'm here with these people. They really are the people who live it and have lived it from, you know, the time they were really young.
Autoloti tuti taina, autoloti tuti taina, aliali, aliali, aliali taina.
These are the masters, these are the people who have the experience and so on, and, you know, you're on the fringes of that. Now, the lovely thing was that they opened their circle there. But nevertheless, for me, that was really imposing to a certain extent.
Yinka hangs back, but then a sad solea changes into a song of celebration.
These are the songs that you'll hear at gypsy weddings. When people get together, this is what they sing. And you can see that in the energy of the dancing. It's really, really very powerful and so much fun.
The family's duende has inspired Yinka to find her own. And as Enrique tells his students, inspired flamenco is real flamenco. Whether or not it's on a tourist-friendly stage. Up next, the secret of surviving an Apache attack. In the Hall of Armor, historical technologist André Renier is looking for a new challenge. He has spent 10 years recreating armor made of steel and discovering how it would have performed on the battlefield. But today, something much less shiny has caught his eye.
What is this?
This is a very special kind of seal. It is called adarga. So it means, this is a Spanish word that comes from the Arabic, from daraca, it means leather. They were only used in Spain during the Islamic dynasties.
In the 15th century, when Spaniards rebelled against Islamic rule, their Muslim adversaries, the Moors, fended off arrows, lances, and swords with leather shields like this one.
If an arrow or a lance goes inside, passes the leather, when you take it out, the leather will be closed immediately again.
So it's a self-healing shield.
As Spain gained its independence, shields and armor evolved. Soldiers and horses, sometimes even children, were encased in shells of steel. By the 16th century, European soldiers started using muskets, making the leather adarga obsolete. Or was it? Andre hopes to uncover this museum secret. The story begins in Tucson, Arizona. Today, it's an artistic enclave where people of many cultures get along. But in the 18th century, that wasn't the case. The Spanish built this fort to protect their farms and settlers. What they feared was the Apaches. The Apaches were buffalo hunters of the plains. Short of food, they resorted to raiding Spanish towns. When Spanish soldiers battled the Apaches, they discovered that European rules did not apply. The Spaniards were trained to charge in one direction, while the Apaches rode circles around them. Well-aimed arrows got by the Spaniards' shields. Against the Apaches, heavy steel was a liability. They needed a different approach. Back in Spain, the military had a cavalry training exercise called the Juegos de Caña, or the cane game. It's reminiscent of battles that Spaniards fought against the Muslim dynasty centuries before. Each trainee fends off blows with a leather shield modeled on the ancient Muslim adarga.
The cane game was an excellent training tool to train soldiers because going in a straight line against an opponent, like a traditional joust, doesn't prepare you for real-world battle. This requires you to turn the horse while engaging your enemy.
As news of the Apache Wars reached Spain, someone realized that the cane game's adept maneuvers and leather shields might have a place on their New World battlefield. In a museum in Toledo, 1 hour south of Madrid, Andre discovers evidence of other leather shields that look like smaller versions of the Muslim adarga, made well after they became obsolete in Spain.
Where did this object come from?
Esta adarga procede de uno de los presidios de Nueva España, probablemente de un presidio que estaba alrededor del año 1750, a mediados del siglo XVIII.
To find out how effective these shields might have been against the Apache, Andre intends to recreate an adarga and put it to a test.
The original materials, which would have been Arabian or Northern African animal hides, simply are not available. In this case, we used modern vegetable tan leathers and raw hides, which this is actually just raw hide. The raw hide has this stiff flexibility that allows it to almost become like cartilage.
But could it have stopped an Apache arrow? Andre has decided there is only one way to find out.
We're actually going to have arrows fired at me by Kimber Spar. He's going to fire arrows at me as I ride past. Yeah!
In multiple tests, the adarga stops the arrow every time. On the chaotic New World battlefield, Andre thinks it would have been particularly effective.
Normally when you're on a horse, the shield's only right here. You can't move a whole lot. You're kind of stuck. With an adarga, you can go completely over your back. It is an amazing equestrian defense because it doesn't weigh much. And it allows you the flexibility to defend and stab, defend, stab, stab over here. And as I come at them, if I'm low, like this, I can come right at them and literally move my horse away from the oncoming arrows if I'm far enough away. I can actually see the arrow coming and just slide. I just have to slide a little bit. I learned this is a really amazing little weapon system.
The adarga would remain in active service until the early 19th century, when the Apaches acquired rifles. Against Apache sharpshooters, the adarga's revival was short-lived. Like all military technology, it was destined to become obsolete. Up next, the secret of a fascist's defeat. For a few days every year, the Royal Palace of Spain, the Palacio Real, closes its doors to the public for state occasions. This man is the King of Spain, Juan Carlos. Perhaps the world's friendliest constitutional monarch.
He's very tactile, he's very physical, he will embrace people and touch them and bring them in a very unique way. I've never seen any head of state do that.
Juan Carlos is the genial monarch today, but there was a time when Spain had no king at all. In 1931, when Republicans declared a new democratic state, Spain's king exiled himself and his family to Italy. 5 years later, Spain was torn apart by a devastating 3-year civil war. After which General Francisco Franco seized power. Through World War II and for 30 years thereafter, Franco ruled Spain like an absolute monarch, even though he wasn't one. And yet, in the 21st century, Spain has a hereditary king once more. How was the Spanish monarchy returned to power? That is our museum secret. Our story begins in Rome in 1948. Juan Carlos was 10 years old, a prince in exile, with no prospects of becoming a real king. And then his father sent him to Spain to be Franco's ward.
He justified this extraordinary decision to hand his son over to the dictator on the grounds that only if Juan Carlos was educated in Spain would he ever be a viable candidate to the throne.
But Franco did not give Juan Carlos any royal authority. He kept all power for himself, while enforcing loyalty and Catholic morality with an iron fist.
This was clearly a dictatorship which lacked every fundamental political freedom. Every form of organized political opposition was banned. We don't actually have a figure, but certainly dozens of thousands of people were executed for their political beliefs.
Often dissenters were arrested in the dead of night, never to be seen again. And those who asked questions about them also disappeared. Even today, the fate of many remains unknown, including a man who opposed Franco's rule and was abducted when his daughter Bianca was just a little girl. Her family created this memorial, even though his body was never found. Bianca hopes journalist Victor Lancina can shed some light on her father's death.
Trabajo en la redacción de las biografías de esos fusilados y en la investigación de las circunstancias en que se produjeron las muertes. Por tanto, nunca has sabido.
Yo solo por fotografías, solo por fotografías y todo lo que ha contado mi madre.
Sí, sí.
Claro, no pude nunca saber nada más.
As Juan Carlos grew to adulthood, he could have spoken out on behalf of those victimized by Franco, but he didn't. Instead, he took a military commission and became the smiling face of Franco's ruthless regime.
Some of his most controversial appearances took place in the royal palace on the balcony just outside here. However, If you look carefully, Don Juan Carlos always seems distinctly uncomfortable. We also know that he became increasingly active in seeking out Spaniards' opinions. He would contact experts, journalists, economists, and so on, and talk to them in private about Spain's problems.
Franco's advisors suspected Juan Carlos might be plotting to overthrow their leader. Spies monitored his every move, but never did he betray a hint of disloyalty. And so, an aging Franco announced that Juan Carlos would rule Spain after he was gone.
The last few people Franco spoke to all received the same advice from him, and the advice was, support the king.
When Franco died on November 20th, 1975, and was laid in state in the Palacio Real, most Spaniards believed that nothing would change when Juan Carlos took power. But in his first address as king, he declared his intention to reject Franco's authoritarian vision.
Hoy comienza una nueva etapa de la historia de España. Una sociedad libre y moderna requiere la participación de todos en los foros de decisión. ¡Viva España!
The king enacted decrees that set Spain on a path toward democracy.
He was in fact much less subservient to Franco than was generally accepted.
But democracy was not his only goal.
Kings aren't like the rest of us. A king has to think about the dynasty. Dynastic continuity is ultimately the be-all and the end-all of his existence. His approach to all of this was quite utilitarian. Don Juan Carlos realized that the only way for the restoration to succeed was to make the monarchy compatible with democracy.
And that's why the Spanish monarchy survives, and why the children of the Franco era have the freedom to discover what happened to their fathers.
Aquí era donde fusilaban.
Aquí es donde fusilaron durante el tiempo de la guerra.
Yo no sabía, yo creí que era en la fachada principal del cementerio. No, hasta hoy no me he enterado de que era en esta tapia.
Por tanto, en esta tapia del cementerio es
sí,
en la que fusilaron.
Donde fusilaron a mi padre. Ya.
El 23 de agosto.
Sí. Vete a saber en qué sitio estaría.
At this place of execution, or in the gilded halls of the palace, whenever light shines on the past, the future appears a little less uncertain. For every mystery we reveal, far more must remain unspoken. Secrets of wealth and power, and of passionate inspiration, hidden in plain sight inside the Palacio Real.